Gold has always held a strange power over human beings. Long before it became a backbone of global finance, it was worshipped, fought over, melted into crowns, and buried with kings. But the moment gold stopped being just a shiny metal and became the foundation of global money, that moment changed the world history. The story of gold standard is a story of trust. The trust people place in money, the trust nations place in each other, and ultimately the trust that shattered this entire system. To understand how the gold standard rose, ruled the world, and finally collapsed, we need to go back to the world where money was chaos, unreliable, unstable, and constantly manipulated by rulers who discovered that printing new coins was much easier than raising taxes. For centuries, kingdoms issued coins made of silver, copper, or a mixture of both. But kings had a habit that destroyed public trust. Whenever they needed money, they simply reduced the precious metal content. A coin that once contained 90% silver suddenly had only 70%, then 40%, then 20%, and yet it carried the same face value. People quickly realized the scam, and prices skyrocketed. Inflation wasn't invented in the 20th century. It was happening in medieval Europe, the Roman Empire, and ancient China. Gold was different, rare, shiny, universally admired. No king could secretly dilute gold without being caught. It was too well known, too easy to measure, too impossible to fake. So while silver coins came and went, gold quietly built its reputation as one thing that everyone trusted. But gold didn't become the foundation of global finance until something revolutionary happened, the invention of banknotes. In the 1600s, goldsmiths in England began storing gold for merchants who didn't want to carry heavy coins around. In exchange, they issued paper receipts. These receipts eventually started circulating as money. People trusted them because they were backed by real gold locked inside vaults. Banknotes were basically promises. Bring this piece of paper anytime and you will receive this much amount of gold. This was the seed of the gold standard. As trade expanded, countries realized something powerful. If they guaranteed that their currencies could be exchanged for gold at a fixed rate, people would trust it. Businesses would trust it. Foreign governments would trust it. It was like telling the world, our money is as good as gold. By the early 1800s, Britain made a bold move. It officially declared that every pound note was backed by a precise amount of gold. No tricks, no dilution, no manipulation. 1 pound equal to 113 grains of pure gold. This was the first modern gold standard, and suddenly everything changed. Nations realized that by linking money to gold, they could stabilize their economies. Prices became more predictable, international trade flourished, investors trusted governments that followed the gold standard because it meant discipline. A government could not print unlimited money because it was restricted by how much gold it had in its vaults. This idea of linking national money to a physical, precious metal spread like wildfire. By the late 1800s, almost every major nation on earth had joined the gold standard. The United States, France, Germany, Russia, Japan. The entire global economy was now tied to a shiny metal buried underground. But the gold standard wasn't just an economic system, it was a global contract. If two countries were on the gold standard, their currencies automatically became connected. Exchange rates were stable. A merchant in London could send money to Bombay, Paris, or New York with full confidence that gold behind the currency was real. The 19th century became known for something economists called price stability. Inflation was almost non-existent. Prices remained stable for decades at a time. A loaf of bread in 1820 could cost nearly the same in 1880. It was an economic world we can barely imagine today. But behind this beautiful stability, something dangerous was building. The gold standard required countries to follow a rigid rule. They could issue money only if they had enough gold to back it. During economic booms, this wasn't a problem. Trade increased, gold flowed into countries, and money supply grew. But during recessions, gold flowed out, money supply shrank. And when money shrinks, businesses fail, banks collapse, unemployment rises, and panic spreads like wildfire. The gold standard forced governments to do something erratic. In a crisis, instead of printing more money to help people, they had to reduce money circulation to defend their gold reserves. This made every recession more painful. But still, nations loved the gold standard because it kept trust alive. It prevented governments from being irresponsible and it kept the world connected. Then came World War I. The gold standard was not designed for war. Wars require massive spending. Governments need to raise money fast, and they rarely have enough gold to back it. When World War I erupted in 1914, countries had two choices: stick to gold and lose the war, or abandon gold temporarily and print money to finance their armies. One by one, nations suspended the gold standard. They printed money like never before. Inflation exploded. But something strange happened after the war. Countries tried to go back to the gold standard, as if they wanted to restore the world to its old disciplined financial system. But the world had changed. Trade patterns shifted, debt levels skyrocketed, gold reserve became uneven, with the US holding the majority of world's gold by the 1920s. Britain desperately tried to restore the pre-war gold ratio, but it overvalued its currency. Exports collapsed, jobs vanished, protests spread. And after years of economic pain, Britain finally abandoned the gold standard again in 1931. This was the beginning of the end. The United States held on for a little longer. The dollar was still backed by gold, but the Great Depression pushed the country to the edge. Banks collapsed across America. People rushed to withdraw gold. Gold reserves melted away. Then came a moment that changed everything. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt banned the private ownership of gold in America. People were forced to sell their gold to the government. The dollar was devalued, and the link between everyday Americans and gold was broken forever. But internationally, the US dollar was still connected to gold. Then World War II erupted, and once again, the gold standard broke down. Nations printed money to survive the war. Their economies were in ruins, their currencies were unstable. In 1944, as the war neared its end, 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new global financial system. They knew the old gold standard was too rigid, but they also knew the world needed stability, so they created a compromise. Only the US dollar would be backed by gold, and every other currency would be tied to the US dollar. The dollar became as good as gold, and the US promised that any foreign government could exchange dollars for gold at $35 per ounce. For 25 years, this system worked beautifully. Trade grew, economies recovered, the world built itself. But beneath the surface, a time bomb was ticking. The United States was spending far more money than its gold reserve could back. The Cold War, the Vietnam War, and social programs at home drained America's finances. Nations around the world started doubting whether the US actually had enough gold to honor its promise. By the late 1960s, other countries began demanding gold instead of dollars. Gold reserve in the US started disappearing. The system was cracking. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. The US would no longer convert dollars into gold. This movement, known as the Nixon Shock, ended the last remnants of the gold standard. Overnight, the world's financial system entered a new era. Paper money became fiat money, currency backed not by gold but by trust in governments. Many people predicted chaos. They believed inflation would explode permanently. They believed global trade might collapse. But the world didn't collapse, it adapted. Countries floated their currencies. Central banks adopted new tools to manage inflation. Interest rates became the main weapon of monetary policy. Global finance shifted into a new, more flexible, though more unpredictable era. Today, the gold standard is often remembered as a symbol of discipline and stability. Some economists argue that the world was more predictable when currencies were tied to gold. Others argue that it made crises far worse by preventing governments from responding quickly. But the most important lesson from the gold standard is not about gold, it's about trust. The entire global financial system, even today, works only because people believe in it. The moment trust breaks, the system collapses. It happened in 1931, it happened in 1971, and it will happen again. It's just inevitable because gold still carries a psychological power. Central banks still hoard it. Nations still measure their financial strength partly by how much gold they hold. And during crisis, whether it's a financial crash a war, or a recession, people still rush to buy gold just like they did centuries ago. The gold standard may be gone, but the world's relationship with gold isn't over, it simply evolved. Gold is no longer the foundation of money, but it remains a symbol of financial security, unchanging, permanent, immune to politics, immune to printing presses. And perhaps that is why the gold standard story still fascinates us. It's not about economics, it's about human behavior, it's about trust, and it's about eternal search for something solid in the world built on promises.